Hey guys, welcome back. If you're new here, my name is Becca and today we are going to be doing the Bookternet All Stars Charity Challenge. So if you guys are unfamiliar with what the Bookternet All Stars Charity Challenge is, it is a tag challenge that has been created by Rachael Marie where I have to go through a list of 18 of the online book community's most popular authors and series and let you guys know whether I have read them or not. And to top it all off, this is all for a very good cause. As you guys are all probably aware, we are currently all dealing with the effects of a global pandemic. So Rachael has put this challenge together to raise money for a COVID-19 charity. So anybody can do this challenge. All you need to do is tell us whether you have read the books and authors that are provided in the graphic and share it on your chosen social media platform with the hashtag BookTernetGivesBack. Every time that somebody does that, Rachael will donate €1 to the charity pot up to a total value of €75. And when we reach the end of May, Rachael will then randomly select a winner to choose the charity from a pre-selected list that all of this money will go to. You will also be able to donate to the charity pot if you so wish. The link for that and all of the information about this challenge, if you would also like to take part, will be down in my description box. So the books and authors that I'm going to be talking about in this video do come from the Booktube, Bookstagram, Blogger starter pack. No matter what platform you start on, there is always a list of very popular authors and series that are kind of must-reads that everybody stands and everybody is talking about. So I'm going to be going through 18 today. These are not all of the most popular authors out there. They're not all of the essential Booktube authors, but they are definitely among the most popular. So starting off, we have the wonderful Angie Thomas, who is the author of The Hate You Give. This is a young adult contemporary about the Black Lives Matter movement, where we follow a young black girl in America who sees her friend shot by a police officer when he was unarmed. I have read this one. I gave this 5 stars. I read this when I first started Booktube actually. I listened to the audiobook of this. Would definitely recommend you go that route, especially if you are not familiar with African American vernacular, as I am not. As well as that, just the voice and tone of the narrator was really well done. I really liked all the voices that she did for all of the different characters, so definitely recommend you go audiobook on this one. Angie Thomas has also written another young adult contemporary. That one was called On the Come Up. I don't actually know too much about this one, aside from that it does center on rap music, and I believe that there is actual rap lyrics in the book, but I don't typically like books where music is a central theme, so I have not read that one. Next up, we have the Shatter series by Tahir, which is one that I have actually not read. This is a young adult dystopian series, I believe, that follows a girl called Juliet who has some kind of power, and I believe that there is a love triangle. I can't remember what one of the guys is called, but I definitely know that one is called Warner, and I think that he is one of these awful characters that redeems himself in some way. I have heard from a number of people that it's kind of not worth reading if the boat has already sailed on that and you haven't read the series. However, I believe that the romance dynamics between Warner and Juliet is something that I would really be into. So at the moment, I have no immediate plans to read this series, but never say never. We then have Leigh Bardugo, who is a very popular author indeed. She is the author of the Grisha trilogy, the first book being Shadow and Bone. This is a young adult fantasy series that is set in a world that is heavily inspired by Russia, and in here we follow a girl who realizes that she has some unique abilities, and because of that she is taken to the Grisha Academy to hone her abilities, even though none of the other Grisha have the same power as her. I read this series a long time ago. I also reread it last year. Would highly recommend this. A lot of people say it's very tropey, but I think it's a very strong young adult series. The second book in this series is my favorite because my favorite character from the Grishaverse is introduced, Nikolai. However, a lot of people don't like that book because it is very slow, but I definitely like the depth that that book gives the series. The second part of the Grishaverse, which is 6 of Crows and its sequel, Crooked Kingdom. This is once again a young adult fantasy set in a city that is inspired by Amsterdam, and in here we follow a ragtag group of criminals and rogues led by Becca, who have teamed up to perform a heist on a very high security prison. This is a duology that I have only just read, but I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed the sequel, Crooked Kingdom, more than I enjoyed 6 of Crows, but I definitely really like the character dynamics in here, and I think that the atmosphere is very strong in this one as well. The final Grishaverse series we have is King of Scars. This is Nikolai's duology. I have not read this one yet. I have been buddy reading the entire Grishaverse with Jade from JD Ray Reads. This is the last book that we have to read. Like I said earlier, Nikolai is my favorite character from the Grishaverse. I don't don't actually know what this is about, aside from that Nikolai is one of the main characters in it. Because it is the third series in a world that I'm already familiar with, I haven't really looked too much into the plot, but I definitely aim to read this one soon. And then finally we have Leigh Bardugo's adult debut, which is Ninth House. This is the first book in what I think is going to be an eventual 9-book series, and it is an adult paranormal mystery thriller type situation where we follow a girl called Alex Stern who has been recruited into Harvard, Yale, I always get them mixed up, who has been recruited into Yale University despite having quite a spotty past, so that she can become a member of the 9th Secret Society of Yale that is in charge of managing all of the supernatural aspects of the other 8 secret societies and making sure that everything is above board. I have not read this one. I read the first 50 pages when it was released and then I just moved on to other things. I didn't have time to read it at the time with my Bookopoly TBR, but I definitely want to read this one soon, as after King of Scars this will be the only Leigh Bardugo book I have not read. Next up we have the Cruel Prince series by Holly Black, or is it called The Folk of the Air? This is one that I don't really need to linger on, to be honest. I have not read the Cruel Prince series. It is highly unlikely that I will ever read it. You guys keep recommending it to me because you think that I'm going to really love the romance dynamics between Carden and Jude. However, I have read 2 very different books from Holly Black before. I've read one of her fae books and I've read one of her urban fantasy books. I just really do not like her writing style, and so I will not be reading The Cruel Prince because it would only be to bring a rant review and nobody needs that. Then we have The Bone Witch by Chupeco. This is not a book that I have read. However, as you can tell by me owning it, it is a book that I want to read. All I know about this is that it is a young adult fantasy that follows a necromancer. Chupeco is, I believe she's Chinese Filipino, so we have own voices representation in here, as this is an East Asian inspired fantasy. You guys know I love me some East Asian inspired fantasy, and I haven't read a lot about necromancy before. Next up we have V. Schwab. Now this is where things start to get embarrassing because I do actually own the majority of V. Schwab's books. However, I have only read 2, which is the first 2 books in the Darker Shade of Magic series. V. Schwab is an author that has an extensive catalogue now. She has 4 or 5, maybe even 6 series under her belt. I do intend to read all of her books. Jade and I actually plan on reading the Vicious duology when we are done with the Grishaverse, and then as V. Schwab is Jade's favourite author, she may take me through a buddy read tour of the rest of V. Schwab's books. Next up we have the Lunar Chronicles by Marissa Meyer. This is an extremely popular young adult science fiction series. All of the books are also a fairy tale retelling that follow a different main character, and then all of the plot lines eventually converge. But in the first book we follow Cinder, who is a cyborg and a mechanic who works in New Beijing. I have read this series. I don't talk about it a lot anymore because I read it way before I started Booktube, but this is one of my favorite series of all time. Not sure if I would love it as much if I read it now, but at the time I absolutely adored it and it holds a special place in my heart. Then we have Adam Silvera, who is predominantly a contemporary author. I'm not going to list off all of his books because he does have quite a few. I have only read one of them, and that one is We Both Die at the End. This is predominantly a contemporary but does have a sci-fi element because this takes place in a futuristic version of our world where on the day before you die you receive a text from something called Deathcast that lets you know that you will be dying soon so you can get your affairs in order. And this book is a male-male romance between 2 characters who have discovered that they are both going to die that day. I did give this book 4 stars. I did enjoy it. Adam Silvera's writing is not the best in my opinion. It's not my favourite, but I do enjoy his concepts and I did enjoy this story. Next up we have Cassandra Clare, who I've actually just spoken about in a video about the most intimidating books on my TBR. She is of course the author of the Shadowhunters world. The Shadowhunters books are young adult, contemporary or historical fantasy depending on which series you read, that follow Nephilim, who are demon hunters that live in various institutes across the world, and each series has an overarching plot, but the main concept of the Shadowhunter world is that they are demon hunters and they have a big bad to defeat. So I have read her first series, The Mortal Instruments, absolutely loved it. This was my favourite series of all time at the time I read it, bearing in mind that this was like at least 2014 I think. Following that we have The Infernal Devices. This is the first of her historical fantasy series. I read this a few years after The Mortal Instruments and I did not like it as much, but I don't like historical fiction and I do definitely think that that was a big contributing factor. Next up we have The Dark Artificers. This is the first book in the second contemporary fantasy series that takes place after The Mortal Instruments does. I have not read this one because I was very annoyed that Cassandra Clare used the final book in The Mortal Instruments to set up this book pretty much. I thought that it was a really cheap move, which completely put me off reading The Dark Artificers. However, I do plan to get to them eventually. However, However, at this point, I am just kind of unsure as to whether I have grown out of the Shadowhunter world now. Next up, we have The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This is a historical fiction that reads like a contemporary, where we follow a aging Hollywood starlet called Evelyn Hugo, who is telling her life story to this reporter. She has handpicked this reporter, but nobody knows why, and they are working through her life story, following the narrative of the 7 husbands that Evelyn had, because the question that everybody wants answered is, which of the 7 husbands did Evelyn love the most? Absolutely loved this, gave it 5 stars. I don't love contemporary, I really don't love historical fiction, however I did adore this book. Taylor Jenkins Reid has a talent for writing a book and making it seem real. So the character of Evelyn Hugo felt so real to me that I felt like I could just go and Google her afterwards, and that it was actually the real life story of a Hollywood starlet, and I 100% would recommend the book on that alone. Then we have Laini Taylor, who has 2 key series, the first one being the Daughter of Smoke and Bone series. I have not read this one yet. I believe that this follows a girl called Karu who lives in Prague, and she is a messenger for a demon, and she has to split her life between art school in Prague and running errands for this demon. However, I have read The Strange the Dreamer duology. This was my favorite book of 2017. In this, we follow a young man called Laszlo Strange who is obsessed with the mythical city of Weep. Everybody believes that the city of Weep never existed, but Laszlo is still holding on to this pipe dream that it did actually exist, and he wants to learn everything he possibly can about it. So when a delegation of warriors show up and ask him to go with them to Weep to solve a very unique problem they have, he jumps at the chance. I absolutely love this book. I really love Laini Taylor's writing. She has a very poetical writing style that I just eat up, and honestly I don't really have any excuse for not reading the series yet, because Curtis bought me the out of print UK hardbacks after I had finished Strange the Dreamer, and I just haven't gotten around to it. Next up is the Illuminae files that you guys all know I have read and loved. Kristoff is one of my favorite authors, and I adore all of the books that he has co-written with Amy Kaufman. This one is a young adult science fiction series that is told in mixed media. We follow 2 different characters in every book, but these storylines are connected. But the start of this series is that 2 teenagers break up the day before a big evil corporation attacks their planet to take over the mining operation there. Our 2 main characters do manage to escape on a survivors fleet. However, the fleet is heavily damaged, and they are being pursued by one of the enemy ships that is currently moving at a faster pace than they are able to. I would absolutely recommend listening to the audiobook as you read along with this, because it has a full cast, sound effects, the whole shebang, and it's a really immersive experience. Another one of my favorite series of all time, we have the Arc of a Scythe trilogy by Neal Shusterman. This is a utopian series that takes place in a world where humanity has conquered every problem that it needs to face, and you absolutely 100% cannot die in this world, aside from if a scythe gleans you. So in this series, we do follow 2 apprentice scythes who are learning the art of killing people, and also discovering the extent of the corruption within the scythedom. 10 out of 10 would recommend. One of my favorite series of all time. It is incredibly fast paced, and the world is so well developed. The world is definitely the shining point in this series, so I would recommend you give it a try if you haven't already. Next up, we have an author that I'm really just not going to say much about at all, and that is Sarah J Maas, the author of my 3 favorite series of all time. A month ago, I did a whole week of Sarah J Maas videos that included a guide to Sarah J Maas, a book review, a spoilery reaction vlog of her brand new release Crescent City, and also a full music video. So I think it's pretty safe to say that I absolutely adore the woman. I have read every single one of her books at least once, but most of them more than that. Then we have a series that I actually can't say too much about, and that is An Ember in the Ashes by Sabaa Tahir. I have not read this book. I do really need to get around to it, and I remember when this book was released and it was super hyped. I actually don't even know too much about this, aside from that there is a romance in here, and it follows a war between militia and scholars. That is pretty much the extent of my knowledge of this series, but I do definitely want to read this one. Then we have Shauna McGuire, who also writes under the name Myra Grant. Now I do own 2 books by her that I'm very excited to read, although I haven't read them yet, and that is Feed, which is the first book in the Newsflash series, which is a science fiction book that takes place in 2014, where things like the common cold and cancer have been cured. However, a new disease comes along that infects the brain and causes humans to want to feed. While I don't typically love zombie stories in book format, I believe that when Shauna McGuire writes as Myra Grant, her books are highly logical and scientific, which is something that I absolutely love. I'm very excited to get to this one. And I do also have Middle Game, which is once again a sci-fi that follows twins Roger and Dodger, Shatter, who I believe have been created so that their creator can ascend to a higher plane of existence. One of them is good at maths, one of them is good with words, and that is all I know. But the series that Sean McGuire is actually most popular for is the Every Heart a Doorway series. Now this is a series of novellas that follow children who have been to portal worlds and have had to return. All of the novellas are kind of connected, though they are not necessarily linear and you don't have to read them in order. I have read the first 4 books in this series, and to be honest, I don't love them. I enjoy them while I'm reading them, but then afterwards I can pretty much recall nothing, and they just don't seem to hit with me the same way they hit with everybody else. Next up we have The Poppy War by R.F. Kong. This is an East Asian inspired fantasy that follows a girl from a very poor province who ends up completing a series of tests that allows her entry into a military academy so she can escape the arranged marriage her adoptive parents have sorted out for her. One chapter of this book does include a retelling of the rape of Nanking, which was a very brutal historical massacre that took place in China. And the main theme of this book, I guess, is how these children who have been in a military academy training to go to war find real war and the brutality and atrocities of war very different from what they were learning. I read this book, I think the beginning of last year. Have to admit, I did not love it. I didn't like that there seemed to be very little world building. I didn't really love the writing style. I think that the plot moved too fast in some elements. This book is not enormous, it's about 500-600 pages, and we follow like 3 small plot threads in that time. However, I do have the sequel. I haven't read it yet because I was disappointed by the first book in this series, but hopefully I will read it at some point. And then finally, we are going out on a low note here because the last series in this video is going to be To All the Boys I've Loved Before by Jenny Han. I have read all 3 of the books. The first book I think made it to my most disappointing books of 2018. The second book made it to my worst books of 2018, and the third book I actually thought was kind of okay. I didn't hate it, which was very surprising to me. So this is a young adult contemporary series that is very cutesy, which is probably one of the reasons that I didn't like it. And it follows a girl called Lara Jean who used to exercise the feelings that she had for boys by writing them a love letter and sealing them all in a hat box. One day all of these letters accidentally get mailed out and she has to deal with the fallout when all these boys come to her and say, why did you write me a love letter? I can't remember now because it has been almost 2 years why I dislike this series so much, but I know that I definitely 100% despised the character of Margot, which is Lara Jean's older sister. Aside from that, I cannot recall, but you can go and watch my worst and most disappointing books of 2018 video if you would like some more information on that. So that is about it for my Bookternet All-Stars Charity Challenge video. This video ended up being a lot longer than I expected it to be, although I'm not sure why it's such a surprise when I have read the majority of the books on this list and I don't know when to shut up. If you would like to participate in this challenge, you will be able to find a link to the graphic down in my description box. Aside from that, down there, of course, as I mentioned, you will be able to find the link to the charity pot if you would like to give a donation. But before I close out this video, I would just like to say an enormous thank you to Rachael for organising this and giving the community an opportunity to give back to the people who are out there saving our lives right now. But that's about it from me today, guys, so please don't forget to like this video if you liked it and subscribe if you want to. If you head into my description box, you'll find links to my Goodreads, Instagram, Twitter if you'd like to follow me on any of those, as well as a link to my Bookish body butter and candle website, the Instagram for that, and a 10% off discount code. But that's it from me today, guys. Bye!
Oh, you bite your friend like chocolate. You say you're a go when nobody knows, with guns hidden under our petticoats. We're never gonna quit it, no, we're never gonna quit it, no.